A man like you, in a place like mine, what else were you planning to take? Her voice was cold. Her silk robe still slipped off one shoulder, and her penthouse smelled like spilled wine and perfume. She didn't remember crying on the ottoman at Hillside Monarch Hotel, didn't recall begging not to be left alone, but she remembered just enough to ruin him. And now, under the glare of Ridgeport's corporate skyline, Jalen Morris stood at the threshold of a life about to unravel, a single black father from North Haven, holding his coat, holding his silence, until he pressed record, not out of fear, but because men like him don't get second chances, because the world taught him to archive injustice in real time. And that night, as the city slept, he left without stepping past her kitchen. A single black father drives his intoxicated boss home after the company party. When she wakes up, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Victoria Langston's cold voice slices through the silence of the office as she holds her cell phone displaying a compromising photo. "A man like you in my house, taking advantage of me when I was vulnerable." Jalen Morris, a 34-year-old single father of an 8-year-old girl, remains seated calmly at the executive desk, his gaze fixed on her without revealing any shock. He had worked as a senior analyst at the company for 5 years, consistently delivering immaculate reports and treating everyone with respect. He never imagined that a kind gesture would morph into an accusation capable of ruining his life. "Ms. Langston, you were extremely drunk last night. I simply made sure you got home safely as any decent person would." He responds. Victoria lets out a dismissive laugh, her blue eyes glinting with calculated coldness. Oh, how convenient. The helpful employee offers to drive his drunk boss home. And then, well, we all know what men like you do when they think no one is watching. The insinuation is pointed and toxic. Despite feeling his blood boil, Jalen maintains his composure. He has been aware of Victoria's subtle prejudices over the years, the condescending comments suggesting he was lucky to work at such a prestigious company, the derisive looks in meetings, and how she consistently scrutinized his work while approving mediocre reports from white colleagues without hesitation. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding here," Jalen states evenly, suppressing the turmoil inside. "No misunderstanding. You invaded my privacy, embarrassed me, and now you'll pay for it." Victoria replies with an aggressive tilt. She leans forward. "I'm considering reporting this as sexual harassment. It's your word against mine, Jalen. Who do you think they'll believe?" Silence envelopes the room like a tangible threat. Jalen studies the woman who holds his professional fate, observing her relish in the moment of power. What she doesn't realize is that he recorded every word from the previous night, from when he found her crying in the bathroom to her safe arrival home, meticulously documenting every respectful action he took. "What if I told you I have proof that nothing inappropriate occurred?" he asks softly. Victoria scoffs. "Proof? What kind of proof could a man in your position have against someone like me?" Jalen simply smiles. A smile burdened with years of patience, strategy, and an intelligence she utterly underestimated. He anticipated this moment. It was inevitable, as people like her invariably unveil their true colors once in a position of power. While Victoria prattles on about consequences and resignations, Jalen contemplates his daughter waiting for him at home, grappling with the everyday injustices she faces, and the plan he had been crafting long before this conversation. If this tale of prejudice cloaked as power resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Victoria didn't know was that Jalen had spent years documenting every comment, every dismissive glance, every microaggression. Now, he finally had the ideal trigger to expose the true face of the company's most esteemed executive. Victoria hurriedly spread her version of events. By the following Monday, Jalen arrived to find strange glances, hushed whispers, and an icy atmosphere that hadn't existed the prior Friday. She had meticulously planted seeds of suspicion. "Jalen, we need to talk," Jennifer from HR said, appearing at his cubicle before he even booted up his computer. "There's been a formal complaint against you." As he walked down the hallway, Jalen noticed coworkers avoid his gaze as though he were carrying a contagious disease. Victoria had chosen her words with precision. avoiding direct accusations that could be easily refuted. Instead, she delivered insinuations serious enough to irreversibly tarnish his reputation. In the HR office, he saw Victoria sitting regally, flanked by 2 company lawyers. Her smile exuded predation, confidence stemming from never having lost a corporate battle. "Mr. Morris," Jennifer began uneasily, "Ms. Langston alleges that you behaved inappropriately when you drove her home after the company party. She has compromising photos." "What photos?" Jalen interrupted calmly. Victoria slid her phone across the table, revealing a photo of her in bed, slightly disheveled. "You put me in this vulnerable position, Jalen. A man alone with a defenseless woman." Jalen regarded the photo with clinical interest. "Interesting. And who took this picture?" "I did when I woke up and realized what had happened," she replied speedily. Jalen thought, mentally noting the first documented lie. What Victoria didn't know was that he had been raised in the welfare system after his mother passed away when he was 12. 5 years in dysfunctional foster homes taught him to document everything, distrust authority, and always have an escape plan. Following a 4-year stint in the Army, he used his benefits to attend college, where he learned strategy, patience, and the importance of thoroughly understanding his adversary before attacking. Now, as a single father to Clarice, a brilliant 8-year-old who was his reason for living, Jalen had perfected the art of anticipating problems and shielding himself from them, especially in corporate settings where black men often faced the sacrifice when issues arose. "Mr. Morris," Jennifer asserted, "do you understand how serious this situation is? We're discussing a potential suspension without pay during our investigation." "Of course," Jalen replied. "And I suppose Ms. Langston's word is viewed as more credible than mine?" Victoria leaned closer, her eyes glimmering with malice. "You're a good employee, Jalen. You always have been. But men in your situation sometimes confuse appropriate boundaries around successful women. It's quite understandable." The condescension felt like a slap. Jalen experienced that familiar sensation again, the same one when social workers discuss people like him, when senior officers in the Army questioned his leadership capacity, when college professors expressed surprise at his high grades. "Mr. Morris," he repeated softly. "Well, you know, as a single father coming from where you come from, working here at our Goodwill, sometimes the lines get blurred when there are significant differences in status." The silence in the room was deafening. Jennifer appeared awkward, while the lawyers remained impassive. Victoria, however, clearly relished every word, each moment of humiliation she believed she inflicted. Jalen thought of Clarice, who that morning had asked why he looked worried. "Daddy, are you okay? You always say good people win in the end." He had smiled, assuring her that good people always find a way. "Ms. Langston," Jalen finally said, "may I pose a question? On the night of the party you mentioned your former assistant, Sarah Chun. You indicated she tried to play the race card when terminated." Victoria stiffened slightly. "That's not relevant to this discussion." "Oh, but I think it is, because Sarah approached me last week. She's suing the company for racial discrimination. Apparently, she has some very interesting recordings of conversations with you." Victoria's complexion paled, but she recovered quickly. "Sarah is a disgruntled employee fabricating stories. No one will believe her." Jalen smiled again, a smile weighed down by years of careful preparation. "You may be correct, Ms. Langston. After all, who would believe an Asian woman's word against a respected white executive like you?" The irony was unmistakable. Victoria realized too late that she had stepped into a verbal trap, deploying the same argument that was now turned against her. "What are you implying?" Jennifer asked. Jalen stood calmly. "I'm not implying anything. I'm merely observing it's fascinating how certain individuals assume their words possess more weight than others based on characteristics that shouldn't matter in a professional environment." As he exited the room, Jalen overheard Victoria fervently whispering with the lawyers. She had no idea he had meticulously documented every questionable comment, every microaggression, every discriminatory decision she thought too subtle to be noticed. Every condescending remark she made had been recorded with a discreet app on his phone. Every expression of superiority captured. and every implicit admission of bias now digitally preserved. What Victoria also failed to grasp was that Jalen was not just any senior analyst. He held a master's degree in information systems and had cultivated a network of contacts that included investigative journalists, civil rights lawyers, and corporate activists who lived to expose executives like her. Above all, she made the critical mistake of threatening not only his job but his ability to provide for Clarice. When you threaten the daughter of a man who has already lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ground up, you provoke a force that cannot be contained or controlled. That afternoon, while Victoria celebrated with her lawyers over what she assumed was a simple victory, Jalen was at home assisting Clarice with her math homework, carefully strategizing every move in a game. She didn't yet realize she had lost the moment she underestimated the intelligence and preparedness of the man she intended to destroy. Victoria wasted no time consolidating her perceived triumph. By Tuesday, Jalen was officially suspended without pay, pending an investigation into inappropriate conduct. On Wednesday, she circulated a confidential memo to other executives urging them to monitor employees who might exhibit questionable behavior. By Thursday, Jalen received a formal letter from the company ordering him not to enter the building until further notice. What Victoria didn't know was that Jalen had spent those 3 days not moping, but executing the first phase of a plan he had developed over several months. His initial phone call wasn't to a run-of-the-mill labor lawyer, but to Amanda Rodriguez, a racial discrimination attorney renowned for dismantling executives who thought they were above the law. Jalen Morris. Amanda's voice sounded intrigued when he introduced himself. Sarah Chun told me about you. She mentioned you might have valuable insight into certain practices at your company. I have more than insight, Ms. Rodriguez. I possess evidence. During their meeting, Jalen opened his laptop, revealing meticulously organized files. Detailed spreadsheets displayed how Black and Latino employees were systematically given lower performance reviews, overlooked for promotions, and had their work scrutinized far more than their white counterparts, despite performing worse. Impressive, Amanda remarked, carefully analyzing the data. How long did it take you to compile all this? 2.5 years since I identified the pattern. Jalen clicked open another folder. But that's not even the best part. What appeared on the screen caused Amanda to whistle softly. There were screenshots of private WhatsApp conversations among executives, internal emails with racist comments disguised as cultural concerns, and most devastatingly, a 23-minute audio recording of an executive meeting where Victoria and others openly discussed how to manage diversity without compromising standards. How did you gain access to this? Amanda asked, visibly impressed. Jalen smiled for the first time in days. Let's just say that when you work in IT for 5 years before becoming an analyst, you learn a few useful things about corporate systems. And when you're consistently excluded from critical meetings, you discover alternate avenues for staying informed. Meanwhile, Victoria was in her office, reveling in her supposed victory with phone calls to other female executives, boasting about how she had tackled a problem employee before he became a more significant liability for the company. She had no inkling that each word was being documented by the monitoring system Jalen had discreetly installed months prior. The problem with people like him, Victoria was saying to Margaret Thompson, director of another branch, is that they don't understand appropriate boundaries. They grow up thinking they deserve the same treatment as individuals who have genuinely accomplished something in life. Margaret laughed on the other end of the line. At least you handled it before he tried to play the race card. Those cases can drag on for years. Exactly. That's why I acted quickly. A single black man against a respected white woman. The courts might be more sensitive these days, but the reality is that credibility still matters. Jalen listened to every word through the system he had engineered. Each remark was automatically transcribed and timestamped. Victoria was digging her own grave without even realizing it. That afternoon, Amanda called with startling news. Jalen, I've got something intriguing. The Justice Department is investigating discriminatory practices at large corporations. Your company is under preliminary scrutiny. That means what? Jalen interjected. Your evidence won't just assist in a labor lawsuit. It could be the pivotal piece in a far larger federal investigation. As he spoke to Amanda, Jalen glanced out his living room window where Clarice was studying at the kitchen table. She had asked why Daddy was home during the week, and he explained that he was tackling some issues at work. "Will everything be okay, Daddy?" she questioned, with the unsettling insight children sometimes possess. "Yes, sweetheart, it will. Sometimes people think they can mistreat others without consequences, but truth always surfaces in the end." Clarice smiled and returned to her math problems, trusting in her father's affirmation. That very confidence fueled Jalen's fierce determination. It was not just about him. It was about crafting a world where his daughter would never have to accept being treated as a second-class citizen. "Amanda," Jalen said, returning to his phone, "there's one more thing I need to show you." "What?" "The recording of my conversation with Victoria yesterday. Her entire performance about men like me and status differences. It's all documented, including the part where she admits she orchestrated the situation from the outset." Amanda fell silent for a moment. "Jalen, do you understand what this means?" "It means she's not merely committing discrimination. She's engineering a conspiracy to harm an employee based solely on racial prejudice. And she was foolish enough to acknowledge it on tape." "Exactly. And that elevates a standard employment issue into a federal criminal offense." That night, as Jalen assisted Clarice with her history homework on civil rights, she posed a question that momentarily stole his breath. "Dad, why do some people think they're better than others just because of the color of their skin?" Jalen chose his words with care. "Sometimes, Clarice, those who have never had to fight for anything think their easy life signifies they are special. They overlook that we're all equal. And what do we do when we encounter people like that?" Jalen smiled, envisioning Victoria celebrating a fleeting triumph that would soon spiral into her utter ruin. "We demonstrate they're wrong, through intelligence, through evidence, and always by acting rightly." What Victoria also didn't know was that Jalen had been spending years building a network of contacts that included investigative journalists, civil rights advocates, and other employees from akin companies who had encountered discrimination. His suspension had liberated time to activate this network in ways he couldn't have while maintaining a full-time job. By Friday, while Victoria dined at the town's most upscale restaurant, celebrating alongside Margaret Thompson her deft management of problematic human resources, Jalen was engaging in a video conference with representatives from the Department of Justice, presenting evidence that would turn Victoria's life into a legal nightmare from which she could never awaken. For a fleeting moment, as he powered down his computer following the meeting, he allowed himself a satisfied smile. This wasn't a smile of revenge. It was the smile of a man who had distinctively recognized the right moment to let justice prevail. A man who had come to understand that patience and preparation were worth more than 1,000 furious words, and that sometimes, the best course of action against injustice is to arm the unjust with enough rope to hang themselves. Monday commenced ordinarily for Victoria. Premium coffee followed by an executive meeting at 9 o'clock. Lunch with investors at noon. She perused presentations when Jennifer from HR appeared at her door, sporting an expression Victoria had never encountered before. A blend of panic and disbelief. "Victoria, we have a problem. A very serious problem." "What now?" Did Jalen hire some cheap lawyer stirring trouble? Jennifer enclosed the door and advanced towards the desk. "The FBI is in the building. They want to talk to you about systematic discriminatory practices." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "There's a federal investigation underway. Apparently, someone has supplied extensive evidence of racial discrimination within the company. Recorded conversations, internal emails, altered HR data. His name is at the center of it all." Just then, the door swung open, and 2 federal agents entered, followed by the CEO, Mr. Davidson, who appeared to have aged 10 years since the previous morning. "Ms. Langston," the lead agent announced, showing her his badge. "I'm Special Agent Carter from the Department of Justice. We would like to ask you some questions regarding your management practices." Attempting to keep her composure, Victoria's hands trembled slightly. "Of course, but I don't see why that would be necessary." Starting with this conversation, the agent played an audio recording from his tablet. Victoria's voice resonated clearly throughout the room. "The problem with people like him is that they don't grasp appropriate boundaries. They grow up believing they merit the same treatment as those who have genuinely created something in life. Victoria's face blanched. That was taken out of context. I was discussing. And this one, another audio clip began to play. A single black man against a respected white woman. The courts may be more sensitive these days, but the reality is that credibility still holds weight. Mr. Davidson abruptly stood up. Victoria, for God's sake, tell me you didn't say that. But worse was yet to come. The agent slid a stack of documents across the table. These are transcripts of your phone conversations from the last 6 months, all legally obtained through a court order based on an extensive complaint about systematic discrimination. Victoria scanned the papers in escalating horror. Every racist remark, every discriminatory action, every conversation where she betrayed her true biases was there. Documented with date, time, and context. Who provided this? Mr. Jalen Morris, along with evidence that you orchestrated a false accusation against him based purely on racial prejudice. The agent presented her with additional documents, including security records indicating she had taken the compromising photo of herself at home 3 hours post Jalen's departure. The revelation struck Victoria like a lightning bolt. Jalen had meticulously documented everything. Every move, every conversation, every moment from the previous night. The security cameras in her own building had time-stamped the photos she attempted to use as evidence. In addition, the agent continued, we have records of you illegally accessing the HR system to modify the performance appraisals of Black and Latino employees, lowering their scores to justify denying them promotions. Mr. Davidson's voice quavered with rage. Victoria, you've compromised the entire company. Our government contracts, our reputation. You've ruined everything. I can explain. There's no explanation. The CEO stated decisively, turning to the agents. She's fired, effective immediately. The company will fully cooperate with the investigation. As Victoria Langston was escorted out of Langston Holdings, the ripple effect began. Executives scrambled to distance themselves. Employees whispered about the day a single father from North Haven had dismantled a power structure fortified by silence, and in homes across Ridgeport, inboxes filled with news articles and federal announcements. An investigation had begun. Jalen didn't return to work right away. He didn't need to. Instead, he spent those days walking Clarice to school, helping her with science projects, and occasionally glancing at the headlines on his phone. He had no need to explain himself. The evidence had spoken louder than he ever could. Weeks later, Amanda Rodriguez called. It's done, she said. The DOJ is moving forward. The company's board is issuing public statements, and they want to meet with you, privately. A settlement is inevitable. I'm not doing this for a check, Jalen replied calmly. I know, Amanda said. That's what makes this powerful. That Friday, as Clarice curled up next to him on the couch, she looked up and asked, Dad, are you going to work at the same place again? He thought for a long moment. No, he answered softly. Sometimes you don't go back. You build something better. She nodded, trusting him in that way children instinctively trust the people who love them right. The next morning, Jalen received a message from a civil rights organization asking him to speak at an upcoming summit on corporate equity and accountability. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stood by the window of his modest apartment, watching the light spill over Ridgeport's skyline, this time not with quiet acceptance, but with the poise of someone who knew his worth had never been determined by his title. What happened to Victoria Langston wasn't just a reckoning. It was a reminder that silence may stretch long, but it doesn't last forever.